The note was the size of a receipt and twice as expensive, because once I read it, it cost my family everything. Dr. Marcus Bellamy's hands never shook. He'd stitched a linebacker's eyebrow on live TV during a Falcons game and signed my flu-shot bandage with a smiley face while the stadium roared. But this Tuesday, in his quiet midtown clinic, his fingers trembled as he cuffed my arm and watched my pulse gallop across a little green screen. "Pressure's fine, Ms. Hayes," he said, voice tight. "Labs are perfect. Heart's a metronome." He swallowed. Many good years ahead. It wasn't what he said. It was how he didn't look at me when he said it, like my eyes were the sun and he'd forgotten sunglasses. I slid off the exam table, reached for my purse, and that's when his chart brushed my shoulder. A fold of paper slid like a whisper into the bag's zippered pocket. "Take good care, Dorothy," he said, and the smile he pinned on me had all the life of a wax museum. "And remember, family isn't always what it seems." I am 70 years old, which means I can hear a sermon hiding in a small sentence. Still, I didn't check the note. Not in the elevator, not past the receptionist with the kind eyebrows, not in the taxi that smelled like pine trees and last night's fries. I've been a schoolteacher and a widow and, on one notable day at the DMV, an amateur bouncer. I know when to hold a question by the scruff of the neck until I'm on my own turf. My house sits in a magnolia-lined street in Buckhead, brick. Blue shutters, and a porch swing that knows all my secrets. The front door opened on the first ring, which was unusual. Richard hates getting off the couch if the TV admits it can do that job. He was there, though, beside Vanessa, Pearls, controlled smile, and Jasmine. Our honor roll hurricane in head-to-toe athleisure. They were mid-conversation when I stepped in. And then, snip, someone cut the thread. "How was the appointment, Mom?" Richard asked. His grin reached his teeth but not his eyes. "Dr. Bellamy says I'm built like a church bell," I said, setting my purse on the entry table. "Solid bronze and loud when needed." "That's great," Vanessa answered, fingers slicking a stack of papers behind her back like a magician with a guilty deck. "Plenty of time to enjoy yourself, Grandma," Jasmine added, tone bright as a refrigerated tomato. The room did that thing rooms do when someone lights a match in their pocket, nothing visible. Everything suddenly warmer. I hung my cardigan, kissed Jasmine's cheek, and filed the moment under "we will revisit this at a later date." Dinner was my pot roast, soft as an apology and twice as tender. No one asked for seconds. Richard chewed like the meat owed him money. Vanessa answered questions in single-syllable Sudoku. Jasmine scrolled under the table, pretending the glow on her face was maternal affection and not notifications. "Is something wrong?" I asked, because I am old enough to prefer the front door to the window. "No, Mom, everything's fine," Richard said too fast, the way a man says, "I love you," when the ring is still on layaway. I said, and let silence take attendance. After dishes, mine, and television, theirs. I retreated to my room, the one with my late husband's vinyls and the reading chair he used to swear was trying to steal him. I closed the door, sat on the edge of the bed, and fished the folded paper out of my purse. 3 lines, no punctuation, fancy work, just a diagnosis and a command. "Don't go home, run, MB. P.S. Your family came yesterday asking for a capacity letter." I read it once, then again. On the third pass, my hands steadied. There are shocks that shatter you and shocks that solder you shut. This was the second kind. Outside my window, Atlanta hummed, tires on wet pavement. Somewhere a dog debating a squirrel. Inside, my life rearranged itself into a chessboard I finally recognized. I tucked the note into my wallet, behind the photo of my first classroom. In front of the grocery list that never stops listing, and turned off the lamp. I let the dark fold around me like a coat I hadn't worn since courage went out of fashion. Sleep didn't come, memory did. Richard at 2 years old. Abandoned and hungry. The day I met him in that county office. Vanessa shaking my hand at their engagement party like it was a business acquisition. Jasmine at 6. Spaghetti on her face, telling me I made the moon. I had loved them the long way, the way that takes your back and your savings and your best china. Love like that makes you blind. Or it makes you a lighthouse. Tonight, I decided to be the second. A floorboard sighed in the hallway. Then whispers, slick as oil, slid under my door. I slipped on my slippers and pressed my ear to the wood. The way you do when the house you paid for suddenly belongs to the things people think you can't hear. We just need guardianship. A voice breathed, Richards. Low and careful. A judge will sign if a doctor backs it. Dr. Bellamy wouldn't. Vanessa hissed. We'll find another. Or we make her look worse. My knuckles went cold. Guardianship. Worse. I leaned closer, catching the scrape of paper. The clink of a glass. The soft, eager agreement of someone who thinks the finish line is money with a bow on it. The hallway fell silent, and then Vanessa said 5 words that salted my veins. Tomorrow. We start Plan B. Plan B, 2 words I'd taught my students as a lesson in resilience. If Plan A failed, sharpen your pencil and draft another. But the way Vanessa said it, teeth clicking against the consonants, made Plan B sound less like an option and more like a burial. I held my breath, ear pressed so hard against the doorframe that the wood left a mark on my cheek. Richard's voice came next, lower, almost ashamed, but not enough to stop. Switch her meds, hide her things, tell her she left the gas on again. In a month, she'll be certifiable. My pulse punched my eardrum. They weren't just plotting to take my money, they wanted to dismantle my mind. Brick by brick, until no one could tell the difference between their lies and my reality. Vanessa's tone dripped satisfaction. Perfect. And once we have that certificate, the house, the pension, the jewelry, it all becomes ours. No one will question the loving family who tried everything to help poor, confused Dorothy. They laughed then, all 3, not the easy laugh of family over pie, but the greedy snort of hyenas deciding which rib to gnaw first. I slid back onto my bed, knees trembling, and stared at the ceiling fan slicing shadows across the plaster. I had given Richard 45 years of love, education, food, shelter, and the shoes off my own feet. Vanessa, I had welcomed into my home as a daughter. Jasmine, God help me, I'd raised since she was a baby. And here they were, choreographing my downfall as if it were a school play. But if they thought Dorothy Hayes was going to play the part of the helpless grandmother, they had rehearsed the wrong script. I reached under the bed, pulled out my late husband's briefcase, black leather, stiff with age, and opened it. Inside were the things they didn't know existed. A notebook filled with passwords and account numbers. Proof of 3 overseas properties. And a key to an offshore account worth more than their combined imaginations. Richard believed I was living on a pension check and stubbornness. Vanessa thought my jewelry box was the jackpot. Jasmine probably dreamed of tuition paid in full. None of them knew about the empire my husband had built quietly, brick by brick, before he died. None of them knew I had the means to turn their Plan B into their final chapter. At 2 in the morning, I packed a suitcase with documents, a week's worth of clothes, and my pillbox, untouched. Thank you very much. Then, with the slyness of a woman who had once smuggled her granddaughter's hamster into Sunday service, I slid my phone into record mode and padded down the hall. Richard's and Vanessa's voices leaked from their bedroom. Do you think she suspects anything? Vanessa asked. Richard snorted. She's too old, too trusting. Besides, where would she go? She has no friends, no family but us. She's stuck. Stuck? I whispered under my breath, letting the recorder catch their arrogance like a spider catches flies. By dawn, my suitcase was zipped, my courage pressed iron flat, and my note to them written on the kitchen table in block letters. Gone out for errands. Don't wait up. D.H. Errands. Yes, the kind that included financial withdrawals, lawyer retainers, and a crash course in revenge. As I closed the front door behind me, I knew one thing for certain: my family thought they had me cornered. But the next time they saw me, it wouldn't be as their victim. It would be as their reckoning. The cab driver looked at me in the rearview mirror the way men look at women who've already lived too many lifetimes. Airport, ma'am? He asked. Bank first, I said, gripping the handle of my suitcase. And take the long way. I'm not in a hurry to be found. Atlanta slid past the windows, neon signs humming against the dark. A jogger with reflective shoes slicing through dawn. The golden dome of the Capitol gleaming like someone had just polished it for church. I'd always loved this city for its contradictions, old money and new hustle. Gospel choirs and hip-hop bass. Magnolias blooming beside glass skyscrapers. It had taught me how to be both soft and sharp. I would need both today. At the bank, I handed the teller my ID with the calmness of a retired schoolteacher and the heart of a woman about to set a battlefield on fire. I'd like to withdraw $5,000 in cash. She blinked. That's quite a bit. Ms. Hayes, are you sure? I leaned in, smiled the way my mother taught me when she wanted the pastor to keep talking about her pound cake at the potluck. Completely sure, sweetheart. I've got some personal matters that can't wait for plastic. Her hesitation melted. A few taps later, the bills slid across the counter. I folded them into my bag beside Dr. Bellamy's note and my husband's old notebook. Money may not buy happiness, but it buys freedom, and freedom buys the time to get even. Next stop, the Grand Imperial Hotel. 10 floors of velvet curtains. Staff that knew discretion cost more than tips. And locks sturdy enough to keep out the ghosts of bad marriages. The receptionist, an elegant woman with a French manicure that could cut glass, gave me the once-over. How long will you be staying with us, Ms. Hayes? As long as it takes, I said, and for the first time in years, the words tasted like power. The suite overlooked the city skyline. From up here, the houses looked like dollhouses, pretty but fragile, ready to be tipped over by a child's careless hand. I set my suitcase down, pulled the curtains wide, and let myself cry. For Richard, for Vanessa, for Jasmine, for the 45 years I had invested in a family that saw me as nothing but a wallet with arthritis. But then I wiped my face, reapplied lipstick, and called the one person who could turn my grief into ammunition, Dr. Graham Montgomery. Attorney at law, shark in a suit, the kind of man who could smell fraud 3 blocks away. He answered on the second ring. Mrs. Hayes, what a surprise. Doctor, I said, voice steady, I'm in need of legal protection. And before you ask, yes, I have evidence, recordings, bank statements, names. There was a pause, then the sound of a chair creaking as he leaned forward. Mrs. Hayes, he said slowly, I believe you and I are about to ruin some people's day. I didn't know it then, but by hiring Dr. Montgomery, I had just lit the fuse on a war that would burn down every lie my family ever told. By the time Dr. Montgomery ushered me into his office that afternoon, I'd already decided one thing, I wasn't going to be pitied. His office smelled like leather, mahogany, and expensive victories. Diplomas lined the walls, framed headlines boasted his wins. Montgomery crushes corporate fraud. Elder abuse case ends in record settlement. He shook my hand with the confidence of a man who'd already envisioned my family's defeat. Tell me everything, he said. So I did. Adoption papers. Richard's childhood scraped clean of hunger and soothed with bedtime stories. Vanessa's pearls and venom. Jasmine's bright eyes dimming with greed. The late-night whispers. Plan B, the recorder on my phone. I laid it all out like evidence on a chalkboard. Dr. Montgomery listened, pen scratching furiously, jaw tightening with every revelation. When I finished, he leaned back and tapped the edge of his desk. Mrs. Hayes, what your family is doing isn't just betrayal. It's elder abuse, fraud, conspiracy, and attempted identity theft. We can not only stop them, we can bury them in court. For the first time since Dr. Bellamy slipped me that note, my lungs expanded all the way. That's exactly what I want, I said. His lips twitched into something dangerously close to a grin. Good. Then here's phase 1. We build a fortress. I'll arrange 3 independent psychiatric evaluations certifying you're of sound mind. Meanwhile, my investigator will dig into your family's finances and movements. Every secret will surface. I couldn't help but chuckle. They've been treating me like a senile old woman. They're not ready for me sober and loaded with receipts. He actually laughed. That's the spirit, Mrs. Hayes. As I left his office, I felt taller, straighter. For years, I had walked like someone carrying groceries for the entire family. That day, I walked like someone carrying dynamite and knowing exactly where to plant it. Back at the Grand Imperial, my phone was a chorus of missed calls, 15 from Richard, 8 from Vanessa, 5 from Jasmine. The messages read like a badly written play. Mom, please call me back. We're worried. Dorothy, where are you? We need to talk. Now. Grandma, Dad says you're not well. Please come home before you make things worse. I turned the phone face down on the nightstand. Worry? No. Panic? Absolutely. That evening, I ordered room service, steak rare, wine redder than Vanessa's lipstick, and toasted myself. To survival, to clarity, to the storm that was coming. I picked up my phone one last time and left Richard a voicemail. Calm, measured, lethal. Richard, I'm safe. I'm thinking, and for the first time in 45 years, I'm thinking only about myself. Don't wait up. His return call came less than a minute later. His voice sharp with something I hadn't heard in years, fear. Mom, what are you planning? Mom, what are you planning? Richard's voice cracked through the receiver. Equal parts fury and panic. I swirled my wine glass, watching the ruby liquid catch the chandelier's light. I'm planning, I said slowly, to finally enjoy my life. That's not funny, he snapped. You're scaring me. Good, I replied. Fear sharpens the mind. You should try it sometime. Silence, the kind that tells you the other person is scrambling for a script. Then, like clockwork, he pivoted to the line they'd rehearsed. Mom, you don't sound like yourself. Are you taking your medications? There it was, the seed they wanted to plant. Erratic behavior, confusion, instability, the path to guardianship paved with their lies. I chuckled, low and deliberate. Richard, my mind has never been clearer. But I'll tell you what, I am recording this conversation. Just in case the world wants to know how you tried to gaslight your 70-year-old mother into sounding insane. His inhale was sharp enough to whistle. That's ridiculous. You need help. Yes, I said, raising my glass in a toast to the empty suite. I need help from experts in fraud, elder abuse, and family betrayal. Don't worry, I've already hired the best. I hung up before he could respond. For the first time in decades, the silence in my life felt like mine. No TV droning in the background. No slammed doors. No sighs from Vanessa as if breathing my air was a burden. Just me, a hotel suite, and a future that no longer included being their victim. I slept with the phone off and the briefcase open beside me. In my dreams, my husband sat in his old armchair, smiling. About damn time, he said, using the nickname he'd reserved for our private victories. The next morning, sunlight flooded the suite. I brewed hotel coffee, weak but hot, and reviewed the investigator's first report Dr. Montgomery had sent overnight. Fraudulent credit cards, total debt, $43. Authorized user, Vanessa Hayes. Purchases, luxury stores, high-end restaurants, Florida Keys trip. My blood simmered. The Florida Keys. That was the week Vanessa had cried about her sick mother. I'd even given them extra travel money. Turns out I had bankrolled her tan. Another page. Richard Hayes, terminated from employment 8 months ago. Living off my savings, my pension, my life's work. And the cherry on top, multiple doctors contacted, requesting certification of Dorothy Hayes' dementia. I slapped the folder shut. Heart pounding. It was one thing to suspect betrayal. It was another to see it itemized in black ink. I stood, slipped into the emerald green dress I'd bought the day before, and looked in the mirror. For the first time in years, I saw not a grandmother, not a burden, not a woman waiting to be written off, but a storm with good posture. And storms, unlike grandmothers, don't ask permission before they break everything wide open. By noon, I was back in Dr. Montgomery's office, folder clutched like a weapon. He stood when I entered, eyes scanning my green dress with a quick nod of approval. Mrs. Hayes, he said, you look ready for war. I am, I replied, slamming the folder onto his desk. Fraudulent credit cards, fake vacations, my pension siphoned like a busted gas line, and doctors, plural, who've already been contacted to sign me off as demented. He flipped through the documents, lips pressing thinner with each page. They've been busy. Good. That means they've left tracks. And tracks. He tapped the folder. Our evidence. I leaned back, crossing my legs the way Vanessa always did when she wanted to seem powerful at PTA meetings. So, what's phase 2? He smiled. Predator slick. We don't just defend. We attack. We document everything while letting them believe they're winning. It makes the fall more spectacular and airtight in court. I raised an eyebrow. You sound like a theater director. Court is theater, Mrs. Hayes, he said, but in this play, you'll have the spotlight, and they'll be fumbling with their lines. That night, back in my hotel suite, I received the investigator's next report, this one hotter than a skillet on Sunday morning. Vanessa, it turned out, wasn't just a thief. She was an adulteress with an appetite for motel sheets and a neighbor named Dave. Photographs, time-stamped videos, receipts for rooms rented under fake names that weren't half as clever as she thought. Oh, Vanessa, I muttered, sipping my tea. Pearls don't hide everything, do they? The following page nearly buckled my knees. Jasmine, my Jasmine, pregnant, 3 months along, father, a married man nearly twice her age. I set the papers down and closed my eyes. Betrayal came in flavors, but this one tasted like ash. She was still a child in so many ways. And yet, she had sat at my dinner table, plotting my undoing between bites of mashed potatoes. I pressed a hand to my chest. Breathing slow, steady, my enemies weren't strangers, they were my blood, and blood, when it spills, stains deeper. But if they wanted a war, I was done bringing butter knives to a gunfight. The next morning, I made my first move. A livestream account, anonymous. For now, title, When Family Becomes the Wolf. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I planned the first broadcast. They thought I'd vanish quietly into a nursing home. Instead, I was about to introduce my perfect family to a few thousand of my closest strangers. The red, Go Live, button pulsed on my laptop like a dare. My hand hovered for a moment, trembling, not from fear, but from anticipation. When you've been silenced for decades, the first word you speak back feels like thunder. Click. Good evening, I began, voice steady. My reflection stared back at me on the screen, emerald dress. Hair freshly styled, pearls gleaming like armor. My name is Dorothy Hayes. I am 70 years old. And tonight, I am going to tell you a story about family. The kind of story that hides behind closed doors. At first, only 3 viewers appeared, then 5, then 12. Within minutes, the number ticked past 100. I continued, laying out the truth like cards in a poker game, Richard's fraud. Vanessa's deceit, Jasmine's coldness at the dinner table. I played the recordings I'd captured, Richard's plan to swap my medications. Vanessa's glee at Plan B. The comments rolled in faster than I could read. This is horrifying. Stay strong. Ms. Hayes, you're a fighter. My grandma went through this too. Expose them all. By the 30-minute mark, over 1,000 people were watching. I could almost feel my family's ears burning across town. Then, midstream, my phone buzzed with a call. Jasmine. I answered on speaker. Hello, sweetheart. You're live with 1.200 strangers. Grandma, turn it off, she pleaded. Her voice tight with panic. You're ruining everything. Ruining? I asked, tilting the phone so the microphone caught my smile. Or exposing? There was silence, then a broken whisper. Please. My friends are watching. My teachers. I can't go to school tomorrow. And what did you think I would feel? I countered. When you sat at my kitchen table plotting to erase me from my own life? The comments exploded. This girl has no shame. Justice for Dorothy. Grandma, you're our hero. Jasmine hung up. I turned back to the camera, pulse steady as a metronome. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, that was my granddaughter. Proof that silence protects no one. By the end of the stream, nearly 3,000 people had tuned in. I closed the laptop with a snap that echoed like a gavel. But before I could pour myself a victory glass of wine, the phone rang again, this time. Richard's name lit up the screen. And I knew his fury would make Jasmine's fear look like child's play. Richard's name flashed across the screen like a warning siren. I let it ring twice before answering, just long enough for him to stew in his own panic. Mom, his voice blasted through the speaker, tight with rage. Turn off that damn stream right now. I sipped my wine slowly. Why, Richard? Didn't you like the part where you explained how you'd swap my medications? Or was it Vanessa's delightful plan B that embarrassed you? You're delusional, he shot back. Those recordings are fake. People will laugh at you. Do you realize what you're doing to our family? Our family? I repeated, letting the words drip with contempt. A family doesn't plot to destroy one of its own. Richard, What you have is a criminal partnership with my last name stapled on it. Mom, listen to yourself. His tone shifted, less fury. More desperation. You need help. You sound unstable. If you don't come home, we'll have to take legal steps. Guardianship. For your own safety. I almost laughed. Guardianship? Oh, darling boy, thank you for admitting your plan on a recorded line. I'll be sure to replay this for my 3,000 new friends. The silence stretched. Then, lower, almost pleading. Mom, please. We need that money. You don't understand. No, Richard. I cut him off. You don't understand. I know about the Florida Keys trip. About the $43 in fraudulent credit cards. About you losing your job 8 months ago. Should I keep going, or do you want to confess live? His breath hitched. How do you know that? Because, unlike you, I know how to do homework. I snapped. You should have remembered, I was a teacher long before I was your mother. On the other end, a muffled curse. Then the line went dead. I set the phone down. Heart hammering but steady, like a drum line marching into battle. Outside my window, Atlanta's skyline glittered. Inside, I felt years of silence peel off me like dead skin. The next morning, I woke to find my live stream had gone viral overnight, and with it, an avalanche of messages from strangers, allies, and even enemies who had just realized Dorothy Hayes was not going quietly. The pinging woke me before the sun did. My phone lit up like a slot machine, notifications, emails, missed calls stacked so high I half expected the device to burst into flames. When I finally opened my livestream app, my jaw nearly hit the plush hotel carpet. 70,000 views, thousands of comments, reporters begging for interviews, messages from people who had never met me but suddenly saw me as their champion. My son tried the same thing. Thank you for speaking out. You're proof we're not crazy. Ms. Hayes, we're survivors. Dorothy Hayes for president. I laughed at that last one so hard I almost spilled my coffee. President, at 70. Well, stranger things had happened, like Richard thinking he could outwit me. But not all the messages were friendly. A string of texts from Vanessa appeared, each more desperate than the last. Dorothy, please stop. This is all a misunderstanding. Think of Jasmine. You're ruining her future. You're destroying us. Please, we can talk this through as a family. Family, that word again, bent and twisted until it was unrecognizable. They didn't want reconciliation. They wanted control. And then came the voicemail from Richard. Voice flat, stripped of the fake tenderness he usually wrapped around his threats. Mom, if you don't come home today, we'll file for guardianship first thing Monday morning. You won't win this. You're playing with fire. I replayed it twice, then forwarded it to Dr. Montgomery with the subject line, Exhibit A. Minutes later, my lawyer called. Mrs. Hayes, congratulations. They just handed us the rope they plan to hang themselves with. Keep every message, every voicemail. We're building a wall of evidence so high no judge will see over it. I smiled, though a lump rose in my throat. Doctor, I'm tired of walls. I want a stage. He chuckled. Then let's give you one. That afternoon, I put on my black dress, my sharpest heels, and walked into a boutique law firm conference room filled with Montgomery's associates. Young attorneys with bright eyes and sharper pencils looked at me not as a client, but as a general about to lead them into battle. Gentlemen, ladies, I said, placing my briefcase on the table. It's time my family learned that the old woman they thought was weak is the same woman who raised a son, buried a husband, and built a life brick by brick. And now, I'm ready to burn down their lies. The room erupted with nods and scribbling pens. But before I could sit down, Montgomery slid a fresh file toward me, its tab marked with 2 words that made my stomach drop: Federal Investigation. Federal Investigation, Dr. Montgomery repeated, watching my expression like a man who enjoys delivering good news in bad packaging. Paul Hayes, the forger your family contracted. He's been an informant for months. The feds caught him last night. He's cooperating. My first reaction was a brittle laugh that tasted like old pennies. So they hired a crook who was already a rat? How poetic. He nodded. More than poetic. Mrs. Hayes, it means we're dealing with more than a family squabble. There are potential federal charges: conspiracy, Mail fraud. Forged medical documents. If Paul Hayes flips, your family could be facing serious time. A warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with pride. It was relief, pure and sharp. For months they'd thought themselves clever, for months they'd been carving their own signatures. Montgomery leaned in. Now, there are 2 tracks. Civil, your assets. The fraudulent credit cards. The attempted power of attorney. Criminal, elder abuse. Conspiracy. We pursue both, but carefully. The feds will handle the document forgery and any interstate fraud. We'll handle the rest and make sure the public record reflects the truth. I felt like a conductor learning he had an orchestra. And Jasmine? I asked quietly. She admitted she's pregnant and involved. Will she be dragged through this? Montgomery's jaw softened. She's a minor in many people's eyes. Mrs. Hayes, we can offer cooperation, testimony, immunity considerations, if she helps us. Right now, we protect her and use her testimony to strengthen our case. Outside the conference room windows, Atlanta buzzed on. Inside, the air smelled faintly of toner and old coffee. The honest odors of law. I let the gravity of things settle, like flour dust on a tabletop. Plan? I asked. We let them talk, Montgomery said simply. We record. We preserve. We let their greed make the case for us. Public sentiment is on your side after the live stream. That's powerful. The jury sees more than facts, they see character. And your character is impeccable, tough, generous, wronged. That narrative wins cases. I thought of the teacher I'd been, the lesson plans. The chalk that left my fingers perpetually pale. The lesson now was simple. Show the work. Don't shout, demonstrate. I nodded. That evening, I sat in my suite and wrote a short statement for the press, calm, dignified, unflinching. If the world wanted a story, I'd give them truth polished like a good shoe. The first interview request arrived at midnight, a local morning show that wanted the human interest angle. I agreed, but only on my terms, live, uncut, and with Dr. Montgomery present. Before bed, I read through more of the investigator's files, credit card receipts, motel timestamps, bank withdrawal logs. Each paper was a small hammer, together they formed a wrecking ball. I arranged them like a mosaic on the hotel desk and felt the fierce, clean satisfaction of someone finally holding proof. I slept, but not like a woman who was being carried. I slept like someone who'd taken the wheel. The next morning, the courthouse press pack greeted me like a flock of hungry birds, and in the middle of the chaos, a cruise of cars pulled up that I would have preferred never to see. My house. My home, now pawn in a desperate chess game my family couldn't stop playing. Flashbulbs popped like fireworks as I stepped out of the cab. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps. Microphones thrust forward like bayonets. Mrs. Hayes, is it true your own son tried to have you declared incompetent? Do you really have recordings of your family plotting against you? Are you suing for damages? Or just protection? Dr. Montgomery cut through the crowd like a ship's prow. One hand guiding me, the other raised like Moses parting the sea. No statements until trial, he barked, voice carrying authority that made even the most aggressive journalist falter. But I paused, just long enough to let the cameras capture me, black suit sharp as a blade, pearls gleaming at my throat, chin high. Justice isn't a privilege, I said clearly, it's a right, and today, I'm claiming mine. The reporters roared as we moved inside. In the courthouse lobby, my stomach dropped. Richard and Vanessa had arrived early, flanked by their attorney, a man with slick hair and a smile that looked borrowed from a used car lot. Jasmine trailed behind them, eyes downcast, clutching her phone like a lifeline. Mom, Richard called, his voice syrupy sweet for the cameras. We can still talk. We don't need all this drama. I stopped, turned, and let the world see the ice in my stare. The drama, I said, was when you plotted to rob me of my sanity. This, I gestured to the courthouse doors, is justice. Vanessa hissed, low enough only I could hear. You'll regret this, Dorothy. Courts are messy. Families forgive, but juries? They ruin reputations. I leaned in, smiling for the cameras. Darling, reputations are ruined by truth, not juries. The bailiff opened the heavy oak doors, and the air inside the courtroom shifted, cool, serious, expectant. A jury pool shuffled nervously. scribbling notes, sizing up the strange family circus they'd soon judge. Dr. Montgomery bent toward me, whispering like a coach before kickoff. Remember, Mrs. Hayes, don't let their lawyer bait you. Dignity wins, rage loses. I nodded, smoothing my skirt. Dignity I had in spades. Rage I'd keep tucked in my handbag, ready to unsnap at the right moment. When the judge entered, gavel cracking like thunder, I sat straighter. For the first time in months, I wasn't the hunted grandmother. I was a witness, a plaintiff, a storm. And when Jasmine unexpectedly rose from her seat, whispering to the bailiff that she had something to say, I realized the trial was about to become far more unpredictable than anyone had planned. Jasmine's chair scraped the floor, a small sound that sliced the room. She leaned toward the bailiff, whispering through a throat tight with courage. The bailiff glanced at the judge, then nodded. Your Honor, the bailiff announced, the young lady requests to address the court before opening statements. Richard's lawyer shot to his feet. Objection, grandstanding, she's not a party. The judge peered over his glasses. Counsel, sit, I'll decide what is and isn't theater. He turned to Jasmine. Miss Hayes, state your name and relation to the parties. She swallowed. Jasmine Hayes, I'm the granddaughter of the plaintiff, the daughter of the defendants. A rustle slid through the gallery, reporters clicking pens, strangers holding breath. Richard's jaw set so hard I could see the muscle jump. Vanessa's pearls clicked like teeth. The judge softened his tone. Do you have counsel, Miss Hayes? She can't, Richard's lawyer began. She does now, Dr. Montgomery said smoothly, already half standing, for the limited purpose of proffer. Your Honor. The judge nodded. Proceed. Jasmine clutched her phone like a rosary. Your Honor, I have recordings, texts, screenshots. My parents, they planned to make my grandmother look incompetent. They talked about switching meds, hiding her keys, moving her jewelry. She stopped, breath hitching. They were going to blame me if it went wrong. A gasp rippled. I felt my hands steady on my lap, the way they had when I taught shy children to read their first full sentence. Richard lurched up. She's lying. Sit down, Mr. Hayes. The judge snapped. Miss Hayes, are these materials preserved? Yes, sir. Backed up to the cloud. She glanced at me, shame and resolve braided tight. And I'll testify to everything. Vanessa's lawyer tried another tack. Your Honor, this is a family tiff inflated by media. The girl is impressionable, pregnant. Jasmine straightened. I'm pregnant, not helpless. She turned to the jury pool. I did wrong. I was angry and stupid. And I wanted tuition money. But I will not help destroy the only person who has never failed me. Silence. Then the judge cleared his throat. Miss Hayes, hand your device to the clerk. Counsel, we'll recess 15 minutes for preliminary review. He rapped the gavel. Court will stand in recess. The room erupted. Reporters bolted for the doors. Richard pivoted toward Jasmine, eyes wild. What did you do? Jasmine didn't back up, told the truth. Vanessa's smile cracked like sugar glass. You ungrateful. Ma'am, a deputy warned, stepping between them. Dr. Montgomery touched my elbow. Mrs. Hayes, this shifts the ground under their feet. Federal interest just went from probable to certain. I exhaled, then let them fall. 15 minutes later, court reconvened. The judge's face wore the look of a man who'd just tasted something sour and found it was his patience. Having reviewed preliminary materials, this court finds substantial, corroborated evidence of attempted fraud and undue influence. He turned to the defense table. Counsel, advise your clients. Any further intimidation of witnesses will result in remand. Richard's lawyer sputtered. Your Honor. Opening statements. The judge cut in. Or we can move to a plea colloquy if that's where this is going. Dr. Montgomery stood, buttoning his jacket. His voice, when it came, was a scalpel. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is not about a misunderstanding. It's about a plan to take a woman's money by first taking her mind. You will see messages, hear recordings, and watch the defendant's own words hang them like portraits they painted themselves. He paused, the room leaning toward him. And you will meet Dorothy Hayes, the kind of grandmother who would give everything to her family. They asked for more. They asked for her. He sat. The jury looked at me, some with pity, most with something fiercer, respect. The defense rose, draped in euphemism, concern, confusion, a matriarch declining. He laid it on thick. But the room had already heard the truth in Jasmine's trembling voice. Words slid off like rain on oilskin. As testimonies began, the clerk cued the first audio, Richard's late-night whisper. Vanessa's hissed Plan B, the clink of ice in tumblers and the rustle of papers like snakes in grass. The jurors' pens stopped moving. You don't take notes when the story writes itself. I felt no triumph, only a clean, bright steadiness. This was not vengeance. This was repair. And just when the defense thought they'd weathered the worst, the courtroom doors opened and 2 men in navy windbreakers with 3 white letters stepped inside, letters that promised the storm had only begun. The doors banged open, and the sight stole the oxygen from the room. 2 men in navy jackets. Block letters gleaming white against their chests, FBI. Gasps rippled across the benches. Even the court stenographer paused, fingers hovering like dragonflies above her keys. The lead agent strode forward with a leather folder tucked under his arm, the other scanning the room with a gaze sharp enough to slice steel. Your Honor, the agent said, his badge flashing. Special Agent Ruiz, Federal Bureau of Investigation. We are here to file notice of an ongoing federal investigation connected to these proceedings. The judge raised one eyebrow. I assume this involves the alleged document forger? Ruiz's nod was crisp. Yes, sir. Paul Hayes has been cooperating. He has provided us with audio and video of the defendants attempting to purchase fraudulent medical certifications and a falsified will. Those materials were turned over this morning. The gallery erupted, reporters scrambling for the exits. Spectators whispering so loudly it sounded like the ocean. The judge's gavel cracked. Order. This is still a court of law, not a circus. He turned toward Richard and Vanessa, who sat frozen. Counsel, do your clients understand the gravity of what's just been entered into record? Their attorney's forehead glistened. Your Honor, we reserve all rights to respond. Respond later, the judge snapped. For now, the record reflects potential federal charges in addition to this trial. Proceed. I glanced at Jasmine. Her eyes were wide, but there was a flicker there, relief. Maybe for the first time. She realized the weight wasn't on her shoulders anymore. Dr. Montgomery leaned toward me, whispering like a conspirator in a spy novel. This is gold, Mrs. Hayes. Juries adore when defendants suddenly have federal agents breathing down their necks. It screams guilt louder than a confession. I folded my hands in my lap, steady as stone. My family had thought they'd built a fortress of lies. Instead, they'd built a stage, and now the FBI was supplying the lights. When testimony resumed, every eye in the jury box darted between the defense table and the agents in the back row. Richard's face had gone the color of chalk. Vanessa's pearls sat askew against her throat, her hand trembling each time she reached to adjust them. Jasmine, sitting apart, never looked their way. Instead, her gaze flicked to me, soft and ashamed, but strong. The defense attorney tried valiantly to steer the narrative back to family concern. But the agent's presence turned every excuse to dust. The jury wasn't picturing dutiful caretakers anymore. They were picturing handcuffs. And when it was finally my turn to take the stand, to meet my son's eyes and speak the truth under oath, I knew I wasn't walking up there as a victim, I was ascending as the hammer. The oath tasted like iron on my tongue. I raised my right hand, promised truth, the whole truth, and nothing but, then settled into the witness chair. The leather was slick, the wood cool beneath my fingertips. Across the room, Richard stared at a spot on the wall just left of my shoulder, as if not meeting my eyes could erase the last 45 years. Dr. Montgomery approached like a conductor raising his baton. Mrs. Hayes, he began, voice warm. Would you please state your name and age for the record? Dorothy Ann Hayes, 70 years old, I said, and a reporter's pen scratched that into immortality. Mrs. Hayes, I'm going to ask you some difficult questions. If you need a moment, say so, but I'd like this jury to understand who you are before we discuss what was done to you. Tell us, what kind of mother were you? I exhaled, and the memories lined up like students at recess. I was the kind who packed 2 lunches, one for my son, one for the kid who always forgot. I worked overtime, tutored after school, sold my anniversary bracelet when the car died in July. I read bedtime stories with my eyes closed. I saved every drawing that had the sun smiling. I allowed a small, rueful smile. I also under-seasoned pot roast when I was tired and said yes when I should have said no. In short, I was human. But I showed up. Every day. A murmur slid through the gallery, the jury leaned in. Shoulders tilting toward me. Dr. Montgomery gave the smallest nod. And your relationship with your son now? I shifted my gaze to Richard. He's a stranger with my last name. Montgomery moved to the evidence cart and lifted a slim folder. Mrs. Hayes, did there come a time when you suspected your family was planning to have you declared incompetent? Yes. I folded my hands to still them. After my physician, Dr. Marcus Bellamy, slipped a note into my purse. It read, "Don't go home. Run. P.S. Your family came yesterday asking for a capacity letter." He held up the note. Projected on the big screen, simple handwriting. Stark truth. Jurors squinted as if the ink might still be wet. Is this the note, Mrs. Hayes? It is. And what did you do next? I listened. I said, that night, outside my bedroom door, I heard Richard and Vanessa discussing Plan B, switching my medication, hiding my belongings, staging confusion so a doctor would certify dementia. I recorded what I could. Montgomery pressed a button. The courtroom speakers crackled alive with my son's whisper. We switch her meds. We hide her things. We tell her she did things she didn't do. In a month, any doctor will certify she's mentally ill. You could feel the air change, the jury stiffening. A low hiss from the gallery. The way a storm front makes birds go quiet. Richard flinched as if his own voice had slapped him. Mrs. Hayes, Montgomery said softly, what did it feel like to hear your child say those words? Like drowning in a glass of water. I said, small, ordinary, and lethal. He let the answer hang. Then continued, did you discover any financial irregularities? Yes. There were 5 credit cards opened in my name, $43 in charges. Luxury stores, restaurants, a trip to the Florida Keys during which my daughter-in-law told me she was at her sick mother's bedside. A few jurors exchanged looks, familiarity with that particular flavor of lie. Did you also learn whether your son had maintained employment? He lost his job 8 months earlier and concealed it. I said, he lived off my savings and pension while planning to strip me of my rights. Montgomery lifted another tabbed document. Bank statements. Your Honor. Foundation for admission previously laid. The judge nodded. Exhibits slid into evidence like chess pieces locking into check. Mrs. Hayes, he said, why didn't you simply confront them immediately? Because they were already crafting a narrative. I replied, the confused matriarch, the concerned caretakers. Confrontation would have been one woman's word against 3 rehearsed alibis. I needed proof. I needed sunlight. Is that why you went live online? Yes, I said, not for revenge, for witnesses. Montgomery stepped closer, voice a thread pulled just taut enough. What is this case about? In your own words? About a plan to take my money by first taking my mind. I said, and about the right of an old woman to keep both. Silence, then the soft percussion of pens. As if the jurors wanted to save that sentence for later. Montgomery smiled, barely. No further questions at this time. The judge turned. Cross. Counsel? Richard's lawyer glided up, cologne preceding him like a poor man's parade. His smile said we were old friends, his eyes said he was picking a lock. Mrs. Hayes, he purred, you're very composed for a woman who claims to have been so terribly wronged. I tilted my head. Practice. I taught middle school. A titter skated across the benches. His smile tightened. Let's talk about the money you didn't tell your family you had. Offshore accounts. Properties overseas. Nearly $2 million. Correct? 2.2. I corrected gently. And 3 properties. He spread his hands to the jury. So you hid millions of dollars while letting your son believe you lived on a pension. Doesn't that sound vindictive? Manipulative? No, I said. It sounds prudent. It kept opportunists from turning love into a transaction. He cocked his head. Opportunists like your own family? If the shoe fits, I said, and I see a lot of blistered heels at that table. He moved in for the lunge. Isn't it true, Mrs. Hayes, that you orchestrated a media spectacle, live streams, interviews, to humiliate your family because you were angry your son married a woman you never liked? I let a beat pass. The way you let soup thicken. I went public because predators thrive in the dark. I said. As for Vanessa, I liked her fine until she started stealing. A juror in the front row didn't bother to hide her nod. The lawyer's gaze flicked to his notes. You claim your granddaughter is pregnant by a married man. Convenient gossip to tarnish a witness. Isn't it? Asked Jasmine. I said calmly. She's told the court the truth. I'm not here to shame her. I'm here to stop a crime. He smirked. And yet you recorded private conversations. You crept through hallways at night. You set up an ambush at a real estate office. That's theatrical, isn't it? Teaching taught me 2 things. I answered. 1. Always collect your homework. 2. If bullies love an audience, give them one, then let them read their own lines into the microphone. A few jurors smiled, small, unprofessional, utterly human. He switched tactics, voice going hushed, faux gentle. Mrs. Hayes, do you still love your son? I felt the question land in my bones. I looked at Richard, gray at the temples, lips a thin white line. The boy I'd lifted from a plastic chair in a county office, now a man trying to shove me into one. I love the child I raised. I said. I don't recognize the man who tried to erase me. A long breath moved through the room, as if the courthouse itself exhaled. The lawyer pounced. So this is vengeance. This is boundaries, I said. He opened his mouth for one last thrust, something sharpened, designed to draw blood. Mrs. Hayes, isn't it true that your physician, Dr. Bellamy, the man whose note you've dramatized, has a prior relationship with your late husband? A conflict of interest? The question hit like a thrown stone, small, precise, meant to chip the marble. A murmur skittered through the gallery. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, not shame, not fear, but anger that he'd drag a dead man's friendships into this. I steadied my voice. Dr. Bellamy and my husband served together on a hospital outreach board 20 years ago. If friendship is conflict, then decency is a crime. He smiled like a man who mistook thunder for applause. No further questions, for now. I stayed in the witness chair as Dr. Montgomery rose for redirect. Eyes flint bright. He held up a fresh exhibit, phone logs and bank camera stills timestamped to the hour Richard tried to access my accounts, and said, softly enough to make the room lean in, Mrs. Hayes, shall we show the jury what your son did the morning after your stream? Dr. Montgomery approached the evidence screen with a calmness that felt like a drawn bowstring. He slid the exhibit into the projector. And suddenly the jury was staring at a crisp bank security still, Richard. Shoulders hunched. Cap pulled low, standing at the counter of First Southern Bank. This image, Montgomery said, was taken the morning after Mrs. Hayes broadcast her live stream to thousands of viewers. Mrs. Hayes, do you recognize the man in this photo? Yes, I said evenly. That is my son, Richard Hayes. And what was he attempting to do? I leaned toward the microphone, my voice steady but carrying weight. He told the teller that I'd suffered a psychotic episode and that he needed to assume temporary control of my finances. A hiss of shock ran through the gallery. The jurors stiffened in their seats. Montgomery clicked to the next exhibit, a transcript of the bank manager's report. Highlighted in yellow were Richard's own words. My mother isn't well. I need to withdraw funds and pay her bills before she hurts herself. Montgomery let the words hang in the air like smoke. Mrs. Hayes, had you given your son any authority, legal or otherwise, to access your accounts? None, I replied. Were you suffering from any medical or psychiatric episode that morning? Unless you count black coffee and determination, I said. A ripple of laughter broke the tension, even from the back row of jurors. Montgomery smiled faintly, then turned sharp. Mrs. Hayes, what does this attempt tell you about your son's intentions? That he wasn't worried about my safety, I said, voice low. He was worried about losing control of my money. And he was willing to lie to strangers to steal it. Montgomery nodded. No further questions. The judge adjusted his glasses, staring at the defense table. Mr. Hayes, I will remind you this is not small claims court. Attempts to fraudulently access accounts under false pretenses are serious business, particularly with the FBI sitting behind you. Richard's lawyer shot up like a puppet pulled by strings. Objection, Your Honor. Prejudicial language. Overruled. The judge snapped. The courtroom buzzed again, reporters scribbling. cameras flashing whenever the gavel wasn't down. Richard sat slumped, jaw tight, his facade cracking like plaster left in the rain. Vanessa whispered furiously in his ear. But the jury had already seen the photo. Already read his words. Montgomery gathered his papers with the leisure of a man who knew momentum was his to keep. He turned to me once more. Mrs. Hayes, thank you. You may step down for now. As I rose, I caught Jasmine's eyes. She gave the smallest nod, an apology wrapped in resolve. But before I could leave the stand, the judge leaned forward, his gavel hovering. Mrs. Hayes, one final question. If this court fails to protect you, what will you do? The weight of the room dropped squarely into my lap. The judge's question landed like a thunderclap in a chapel. If this court fails to protect you, what will you do? The room fell so quiet I could hear the tick of the courtroom clock. Even the reporters froze, pens dangling midair. Richard's lawyer smirked faintly, as though daring me to falter. I folded my hands, took a slow breath, and let my voice cut through the stillness. Your Honor, if this court fails me, I will do what I've always done, stand up. I will use my evidence, my voice, and yes, the very public that has already rallied behind me. I will not vanish into some facility while thieves divide my life. I will fight until my last day, because the truth does not retire. Gasps. A murmur spread across the benches. A juror dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. The judge's expression softened, though his tone stayed firm. Thank you, Mrs. Hayes. That will be all for now. He struck the gavel once, but it sounded less like order and more like respect. As I stepped down, Richard's lawyer rushed to the defense table, whispering frantically. Vanessa's hand trembled as she adjusted her necklace, pearls clicking against each other like nervous teeth. Richard wouldn't look at me. Jasmine, though, she stood a little taller. Her shoulders no longer slumped under their shadow. During recess, I sat with Dr. Montgomery in a side chamber. He leaned close, voice low enough to be mistaken for a prayer. That answer, Mrs. Hayes, you just won half the jury. They saw not a victim but a warrior. And jurors don't punish warriors. They punish predators. I allowed myself a long sip of water. Good, I said, because predators should know, sometimes the prey grows teeth. When we returned, the prosecution called its next witness, the bank manager, Patricia Nguyen. She walked to the stand in a gray blazer, carrying the quiet authority of someone who had seen every trick in the book. Ms. Nguyen, the prosecutor asked, what happened when Mr. Richard Hayes came to your bank? She described it plainly, Richard's urgency, his claim of my mental collapse, his insistence on accessing my accounts. He was nervous, she said, perspiring. I asked for legal documents. He had none. When I refused, he became agitated. Did you allow him any access? Of course not. Without court orders or power of attorney. He had no standing. Her testimony was like hammer strikes, each one nailing Richard tighter into the box he'd built for himself. The jury scribbled furiously, even the defense attorney's pen stilled for a moment. By the time Ms. Nguyen stepped down, the narrative was clear. Richard hadn't been a worried son, he had been a thief caught mid-heist. And just when the defense prepared to shift blame, the prosecutor called a surprise witness who carried photographs that could rip Vanessa's perfect wife mask to shreds. The bailiff's voice rang out, the prosecution calls Mr. David Harlow. Gasps fluttered through the gallery. I felt Vanessa stiffen before the name even settled. Her knuckles whitened on the table, nails digging into the wood as if she could hold her secrets down by force. A tall man in his 40s, with sandy hair and a suit that didn't quite fit, strode to the witness stand. His face bore the weary confidence of someone tired of hiding. When he lifted his hand to swear the oath, Vanessa's eyes darted wildly toward Richard. He leaned in, whispering something sharp, but it was too late. The prosecutor stepped forward. Mr. Harlow, please state your name and occupation. David Harlow, contractor. I've lived in Greenfield for 15 years. And do you know the defendant? Mrs. Vanessa Hayes? David cleared his throat. Yes, intimately. The word detonated in the room. Reporters scribbled like their pens were on fire. The jury leaned forward, hungry. Vanessa went pale, then flushed scarlet. Mr. Harlow, could you clarify what you mean by intimately? I've been in a relationship with Mrs. Hayes for 2 years. We met on a job site. She said she was unhappy that her husband wasn't providing. We started meeting at the Pinecrest Motel. Tuesdays and Thursdays. A strangled noise tore from Richard's throat. Half growl, half gasp. His lawyer's hand shot up. Objection. Irrelevant character assassination. The judge's gavel cracked. Overruled. Affairs are relevant when trust and financial manipulation are on trial. Proceed. The prosecutor nodded. Mr. Harlow, did Mrs. Hayes ever discuss her mother-in-law, Mrs. Dorothy Hayes? Yes, David said, voice steady. She called her an obstacle. Said she was waiting for the old woman to finally go so she and Richard could live the life they deserved. She bragged about pushing Dorothy into a nursing home, said it was the fastest way to free up the money. Murmurs surged through the courtroom. A juror in the back shook his head in disgust. Did you ever witness Mrs. Hayes spending large sums of money? Yes. She used a credit card in Dorothy's name. Bought me gifts. Paid for vacations. She said Dorothy would never notice. Senile old bats don't check their statements. Those were her words. Vanessa slammed her palms on the table. He's lying, she shrieked. Voice cracking. He's a bitter man, I ended it. The judge glared. Mrs. Hayes, another outburst like that and I'll hold you in contempt. David calmly reached into his jacket and handed over a small stack of photographs. These are from our trips. Receipts. 2. All in Dorothy's name. The prosecutor displayed them on the screen. Vanessa, wrapped in David's arms at a beach resort, holding champagne flutes. The date stamp aligned perfectly with the week she'd told me she was caring for her sick mother. The gallery gasped again. A reporter whispered, front page. I sat straighter, feeling the sting of betrayal. Yes, but also a grim, quiet satisfaction. Their masks were falling one by one, and the jury was seeing the rot beneath. And just when the silence grew heavy, Jasmine rose unexpectedly, her voice trembling but clear. Your Honor, I have something to say. The judge adjusted his glasses, eyes narrowing at Jasmine. Miss Hayes, you are not scheduled to testify at this stage. What exactly is it that you believe you need to say? Jasmine stood, her hands trembling as she clutched the rail in front of her. Her voice wavered but held a thread of steel underneath. Your Honor, I can't keep pretending. I need to tell the truth about what I saw, what I heard, and what they asked me to do. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Richard's head snapped toward her. Fury etched across his face. Sit down, Jasmine, he hissed, his whisper carrying farther than he intended. The judge banged the gavel. Order. Miss Hayes, are you willing to testify under oath, knowing your statements may incriminate members of your family? Yes, sir, Jasmine said, her voice breaking but resolute. I can't carry their lies anymore. The bailiff escorted her to the stand. She raised her right hand, swore the oath, and sat down, her shoulders squared as if she'd aged years in minutes. The prosecutor stepped forward gently. Jasmine, tell us what happened in your own words. Tears shimmered in her eyes, but she didn't look away from the jury. My parents told me that Grandma was losing her mind. They said she left the stove on, forgot names, and wandered at night. At first, I believed them, but then I overheard them planning. They weren't describing what was happening, they were deciding what to make happen. The jury stilled, hanging on every word. They wanted me to help. Mom said, if Grandma forgets where her purse is, don't tell her. If she asks about her pills, give her the wrong ones. Just a few times. We'll fix it later with the doctor's note. Jasmine's voice cracked. I couldn't do it. I made excuses. I hid in my room. But I also didn't stop them. And for that, I'm sorry, Grandma. Her eyes turned to me, brimming with shame. My heart clenched. I wanted to rush to her, to hold her, but I stayed still. The courtroom wasn't a place for embraces, it was a place for truth. The prosecutor's tone stayed soft. Jasmine, did your parents ever say why they wanted your grandmother declared incompetent? Yes, they said the house, the pension, the savings, it was all wasted while she was alive. Dad said he needed the money for debts. Mom said she was tired of waiting. And I was selfish too. I thought about how college would be easier if Grandma wasn't in charge anymore. She broke down then, sobbing into her hands. The judge gave her a moment. A juror reached for a tissue box and passed it down the line. Their faces somber. some openly moved. When Jasmine finally looked up again, her cheeks streaked with tears. She whispered, "But Grandma never gave up on me. Not even now. I'm here to tell the truth, even if it means my parents hate me forever." The silence that followed was absolute, heavy with the sound of honesty finally cracking through years of deceit. Richard slammed his fist on the defense table. "Traitor," he roared, before his lawyer yanked him down. The judge thundered with his gavel. "Mr. Hayes, one more outburst and you will be removed from this courtroom." But the damage was already done. The jury's eyes burned with indignation, at him, at Vanessa, at the whole rotten plan. As Jasmine wiped her eyes, the prosecutor leaned in and asked the question that would shatter the last piece of Richard's defense. "Jasmine, what exactly did your father tell you about Plan B?" Jasmine's hands shook as she twisted the tissue in her lap. Her eyes flicked toward Richard, pleading, fearful, then back to the prosecutor. She drew in a long breath. "He said," her voice faltered, then steadied, iron hiding inside the tears. "He said Plan B was to make Grandma really lose her mind. He told Mom they could switch her medications, hide her glasses, move things around the house, and tell her she'd done things she hadn't. He said in a month, any doctor would sign papers saying she had dementia." The words struck like a thunderbolt. The jury recoiled. One man muttered an oath under his breath. "Jasmine," the prosecutor said gently, "are you certain these were your father's words?" She nodded. "I remember exactly," he said. "We'll build her madness for her." The court erupted, gasps, whispers, even the shuffle of reporters rushing to file headlines. The judge's gavel banged like gunfire. "Order. There will be order." Richard leapt from his chair, face crimson. "She's lying. She's confused, just like my mother." The gavel cracked again. "Mr. Hayes, sit down or I will have you held in contempt." But it was too late. The jury had seen it, the flash of rage, the refusal to let his daughter speak, the mirror of cruelty that matched every recording they'd heard. Jasmine's lip trembled, but she pressed on. "He told me, if I loved my family, I'd help. He said I'd thank him later when I had everything I wanted." Her eyes found me across the courtroom, soft and broken. "But I couldn't hurt you, Grandma." My throat ached, but I held her gaze. "You don't have to anymore," I whispered, though the microphone carried my words farther than I meant. The prosecutor let the silence weigh heavy before asking one last question. "Jasmine, why are you telling us this now?" Her answer was a dagger aimed straight at the defense table. "Because I realized, if they could do this to Grandma, they could do it to me. And I refused to be their next victim." The jury collectively exhaled, as though they'd been holding their breath. The defense attorney buried his face in his hands, already calculating how little he had left to work with. The judge leaned forward, his tone grave. "Let the record reflect that the witness has provided direct testimony confirming premeditated intent to defraud and manipulate the victim's mental state." He paused, eyes locking on Richard and Vanessa. "This is no longer just elder abuse. This is conspiracy." Vanessa covered her face with trembling hands. Richard slumped in his chair, eyes deadened, his bravado leaking out like air from a punctured tire. And then, as if fate wanted to hammer the final nail, the bailiff approached the bench with an envelope marked FBI, confidential evidence submission. The judge slid open the envelope with a letter opener, his brow furrowing as he scanned the contents. The room stilled, tension coiling like a drawn bowstring. Then he held the packet aloft. "This court has just received additional evidence from the Federal Bureau of Investigation," he announced, his voice ringing across the chamber. "Video and audio recordings obtained during a sting operation with Paul Hayes, the known document forger." Reporters surged forward, the gallery buzzing like a hive. Richard's lawyer leapt to his feet. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. We have not had time to review this material." The gavel cracked down hard. "Sit down, counsel. The jury will see this now." The bailiff dimmed the lights, and the projector screen flickered to life. Grainy at first, then clear enough to twist the knife. Richard and Vanessa, seated at a motel table, stacks of cash between them. Paul Hayes leaned back in his chair, smirking. Richard's voice filled the courtroom. "We need the medical records to show early dementia. Backdate them if you have to. Once she's committed, we'll get access to everything." Vanessa chimed in, her tone icy. Almost rehearsed. And don't forget the will. It needs to say she left everything to us. We can claim she signed it before she got too bad. No one will question it. The jury gasped. A woman in the front row covered her mouth. Eyes wide. The prosecutor let the video roll. Arms folded, savoring every second. Then came the dagger. Paul Hayes's voice. You understand this is fraud, right? Richard chuckled. Call it survival. We deserve the money more than she does. When the lights came back on, the silence was suffocating. Every juror stared at the defendants as if they were already in orange jumpsuits. The judge's face was stone. Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, you have just been heard conspiring to commit federal crimes on tape. This evidence will be entered into record immediately. Vanessa broke first. She lunged toward Richard, her voice shrill. You said this would never come out. You swore. Shut up, Richard snapped, shoving her back into her chair. The bailiff stepped forward, hand on his holster, and the judge slammed the gavel again. One more outburst and I will have both of you removed from this courtroom in chains. The prosecutor turned to the jury, his voice calm but deadly sharp. Ladies and gentlemen, what you just heard is not speculation, not rumor, not even second-hand testimony. It is the defendants' own voices, planning fraud, forgery, and abuse against their mother. The only question left is not if they are guilty, but how much justice you are prepared to deliver. I felt a strange stillness wash over me. For months I had lived with fear, with betrayal crawling through the walls of my own home. But now, here in this room, the truth had been dragged into the light. And for the first time, I saw Richard's face break, not with anger, but with the dawning horror of a man realizing the game was over. The judge called for a recess. But as the jury filed out, Richard suddenly rose, his voice booming through the chamber. You think this is over? Mother? You have no idea what's coming. The words ripped through the courtroom like a gunshot. You think this is over? Mother? You have no idea what's coming. Richard shouted, his face twisted, spittle flying. The gallery gasped. A juror clutched her chest. The bailiff lunged forward, pinning Richard's arm behind his back. Order, the judge thundered, his gavel striking like a drumbeat. Mr. Hayes, another outburst and I will hold you in contempt and remand you immediately. But Richard wasn't finished, straining against the bailiff's grip. He glared at me with eyes that once belonged to the boy I rocked to sleep. Now they belonged to a stranger. You'll regret crossing me, old woman. The courtroom erupted, reporters scribbling like lightning, murmurs swelling into shouts. Vanessa buried her face in her hands, shoulders trembling. Jasmine stared at her father in stunned silence, tears streaming down her cheeks. The judge's gavel slammed again, harder this time. Enough. Bailiff, escort Mr. Hayes to holding. He will cool off there until further notice. The bailiff hauled Richard toward the exit, his protests echoing down the hall until the heavy door clanged shut. The silence that followed was thick, like the pause after a thunderstorm. The judge removed his glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose, and then fixed his gaze on the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, you will disregard the defendant's outburst. Threats made in anger have no bearing on your deliberations. But we all knew better. The jury had seen it, the rage, the contempt, the complete lack of remorse. If there had been even a shred of doubt, Richard had burned it to ash with his own tongue. During recess, Dr. Montgomery leaned close, whispering just for me. That outburst sealed it. Juries don't forgive threats against a 70-year-old woman in open court. He just wrote his own verdict. I nodded, though my chest was heavy. I never wanted this. I whispered, I only wanted my family. Montgomery's eyes softened. Sometimes, Mrs. Hayes, family isn't blood. Sometimes it's the people who choose to stand with you, even when it costs them. His gaze flicked toward Jasmine, who sat alone, wringing her hands, her young shoulders carrying the weight of betrayal and truth. When court resumed, the judge's voice was iron. We will continue without Mr. Hayes present. The record will reflect his removal due to repeated outbursts and threats. The prosecutor rose, turning to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, the defendants would have you believe they acted out of concern. But you've now heard their own voices plotting fraud. You've seen their attempts to drain bank accounts. You've witnessed their daughter testify to Plan B, the calculated destruction of Mrs. Hayes's sanity. And you've seen Mr. Hayes himself threaten the very victim in open court. He let the silence breathe. Then, with words sharp enough to cut steel, this isn't a family dispute. It's a crime. The jury's faces were carved from stone. Some leaned forward, as if ready to write the word guilty already. And then, just as the prosecutor moved to rest his case, Vanessa stood suddenly, her voice shrill. Wait. I'll tell you everything, just don't let me go down for his mistakes. Vanessa shot to her feet, knocking her chair backward with a metallic clang. Her hands shook as she clutched the rail in front of her. Her voice cracked, raw and desperate. Wait, I'll tell you everything, just don't let me go down for his mistakes. The courtroom froze. Reporters stopped mid-scribble. Jurors leaned forward as though the very air had shifted. Her attorney scrambled to pull her back down. Mrs. Hayes, sit, don't say another word without my counsel. But she shoved his hand away, tears streaming down her face. No, I'm done covering for him. He planned everything, every last detail. The forger, the bank, even Plan B. He said it was the only way we'd survive his debts. He used me. The prosecutor's eyes flickered, quick as lightning. Your Honor, may I treat this as a hostile witness turning state's evidence? The judge nodded once. Proceed. Vanessa collapsed into the witness stand, trembling, mascara streaking like war paint down her cheeks. Her pearl necklace sat crooked, a mockery of grace. Mrs. Hayes, the prosecutor said carefully, are you telling this court that your husband, Richard Hayes, orchestrated the conspiracy against his mother? Yes, she cried. He lost everything, his job, his savings. He gambled it away. He told me if I didn't help, we'd be ruined. He said Dorothy was old. She'd never know, and that it was her fault for living too long. The jury recoiled at the venom in those words. One man muttered under his breath. Unbelievable. Did you personally benefit from this scheme? The prosecutor pressed. Vanessa's shoulders slumped. Yes, I used her cards. I told myself it was temporary, that once Richard got back on his feet, we'd put it all back. But he never planned to stop. He was waiting for her to die. The prosecutor's tone sharpened. And what about the forged will? Did you know about that? Vanessa buried her face in her hands. I delivered the cash to the forger. Richard made the call, but I delivered the money. God help me. I thought it was the only way out. Mrs. Hayes, the prosecutor said, voice ringing now, do you deny that you, too, conspired to steal from Dorothy Hayes? Her sobs filled the chamber. I don't deny it. She lifted her tear-streaked face toward me. Eyes hollow, voice splintering. I never hated you, Dorothy. I just loved him more than I loved myself. And he dragged me down with him. The judge's gavel struck hard. Order. The jury will disregard emotional appeals. What matters here are the facts, and the facts are damning. I sat stiffly, watching the woman I once called daughter-in-law unravel like cheap lace. For years, she'd smiled at my table, kissed my cheek, whispered, thank you, over birthday gifts. And all the while, she was rehearsing betrayal. But her confession wasn't salvation, it was gasoline on the fire. And just as Vanessa's sobs echoed through the chamber, the prosecutor leaned in for the final strike. Mrs. Hayes, did your daughter Jasmine know about these plans, and did she help? Vanessa froze, her sobs cutting off like a faucet turned tight. The question hung in the courtroom like smoke, thick and suffocating. All eyes turned to her, then to Jasmine, who sat trembling in the gallery, her face pale as porcelain. Mrs. Hayes, the prosecutor pressed, voice sharp as glass, did your daughter Jasmine know about these plans? Did she help? Vanessa's lips trembled, her gaze flicked toward Richard's empty chair, then back to Jasmine. For a moment, I thought she might lie again, try to drag her own child down with her. But her shoulders collapsed inward, and she whispered, she knew some of it. She overheard us, but she never helped. She refused. She told me once she couldn't betray her grandmother like that. I told Richard she was weak. Jasmine's eyes welled, her body folding in on itself. The jury's eyes softened toward her, a few even gave small nods. The kind that said, we believe you. The prosecutor didn't let go. So to be clear, Mrs. Hayes, you and your husband deliberately asked your daughter to assist in gaslighting her grandmother into believing she was insane? Vanessa's voice cracked. Yes, God forgive me. Yes. The words detonated in the chamber. Jasmine buried her face in her hands, sobbing openly. Reporters nearly fell over themselves scribbling. Cameras clicked like gunfire. The prosecutor turned toward the jury, letting the silence settle heavy. Ladies and gentlemen, this isn't just fraud. This is child corruption. These defendants were willing to weaponize their own daughter to destroy an innocent woman. The judge's gavel slammed, but even he looked shaken. Let the record reflect that the witness has admitted to involving a minor in the attempted conspiracy. His voice hardened, like iron cooling in water. This court has seen many crimes, but few as cold-blooded as this. Vanessa collapsed further into her chair, weeping into her hands, her pearl necklace snapping as it hit the floor, beads scattering across the polished wood like lost years. I kept my gaze fixed forward, though my heart ached for Jasmine. She had been caught between love and loyalty, innocence and corruption, and yet here she was, choosing truth at the cost of family. And for that, I silently vowed, she would never walk alone again. As the courtroom buzzed with shock, the defense attorney finally rose, desperate to salvage what scraps remained. Your Honor, he said, voice shaking. The defense calls Mrs. Dorothy Hayes back to the stand. The words hung in the air like a dare. Your Honor, the defense attorney said, his voice carrying both bravado and desperation. The defense calls Mrs. Dorothy Hayes back to the stand. The judge's brow furrowed. Mr. Caldwell, your client's mother has already testified extensively. What possible new ground do you intend to cover? The attorney smoothed his tie, though sweat glistened at his temple. Your Honor, we believe Mrs. Hayes's credibility must be tested further, specifically regarding her mental state. The defense contends she has exaggerated events, perhaps even fabricated them. Gasps rippled through the gallery. One juror scowled openly. Dr. Montgomery rose with quiet fury. Objection. This is nothing but character assassination dressed in cheap legal robes. We have 3 independent psychiatric evaluations confirming Mrs. Hayes is in perfect mental health. The judge's gavel cracked. Objection noted, but I'll allow limited questioning. Limited. Mr. Caldwell, step carefully, or you'll find yourself in contempt. I stood, spine straight as steel, and returned to the witness chair. My heart thudded, but my face betrayed nothing. I had been tested all my life, by grief, by betrayal, by long nights of sacrifice. This was simply another exam, and I had studied for decades. The defense attorney approached slowly, a smile that didn't touch his eyes. Mrs. Hayes, he began, his tone falsely kind. You're 70 years old, correct? Yes. Do you ever misplace your glasses? Forget where you've put your keys? A ripple of laughter slipped from the gallery. I allowed myself the smallest smile, like every human being who's ever owned glasses or keys. The jurors chuckled, the tension easing for a heartbeat. The attorney's jaw tightened. And isn't it true, Mrs. Hayes, that you've lived alone since your husband's death? That isolation can affect perception. Can it not? I leaned forward, my voice calm but edged. Isolation doesn't create forged wills. Counselor, it doesn't open fraudulent credit cards or walk into banks pretending to be me. Those are actions of the living, not hallucinations of the lonely. The jury nodded, a murmur of agreement spreading like wildfire. The attorney pressed harder, voice rising. But you admit, you've kept secrets. Large sums of money, offshore accounts, properties your family never knew existed. Isn't it possible, Mrs. Hayes, that your paranoia about protecting those assets has warped your judgment? I let the pause stretch until the silence weighed heavy. Then I met his eyes squarely. Protecting what my husband and I built isn't paranoia. It's stewardship. And if you think saving for the future is a crime, then perhaps you should examine your own bank accounts. Laughter broke out in the gallery, sharp and unrestrained. The judge's gavel banged for order. But the sound of jurors smiling told me all I needed. The attorney flushed, his mask of confidence cracking. He shuffled his papers, voice faltering now. No further questions, Your Honor. As I stepped down from the stand, Dr. Montgomery leaned toward me, whispering just loud enough for me to hear, you didn't just survive that. Dorothy, you owned it. And for the first time since the trial began, I allowed myself to believe victory wasn't just possible. It was inevitable. The judge turned solemnly toward the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard the testimony, the confessions, the recordings, and the federal evidence. Tomorrow, you will begin deliberations, but tonight, you must carry the weight of justice on your shoulders. The judge's voice was deep and deliberate, every word striking the oak-paneled chamber like a slow drumbeat. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, tomorrow you will begin deliberations. You have heard the testimony, the recordings, the confessions, and the federal evidence. It is not my job to decide the facts. That sacred duty lies with you. Tonight, you must carry the weight of justice on your shoulders. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. The air was so heavy you could almost hear the heartbeat of the nation pressing in. Go home, rest, clear your minds, and remember, this is not merely about money, nor property, nor betrayal. It is about whether a family can weaponize love into cruelty and escape consequence. The gavel came down like thunder. Court adjourned until tomorrow at 9 a.m. The room erupted. Reporters scrambled for the exits. Cell phones buzzing like cicadas. Voices rising in 100 directions. Vanessa turns on Richard. Daughter exposes Plan B. FBI tapes reveal conspiracy. Headlines were already being born before I had even risen from my seat. I felt Jasmine's hand slip into mine. Her fingers were ice cold. But the grip was firm. Grandma, she whispered, eyes wide. What if the jury, what if they don't believe me? I squeezed her hand gently. They will. You spoke the truth, and truth has a sound. Jasmine, it rings louder than lies. Dr. Montgomery stepped beside us. Briefcase under his arm, his face carved in confidence. They've already made up their minds. He said quietly, jurors don't forget recordings. They don't forget threats. And they sure as hell don't forget when a daughter confesses her own parents tried to use her as a pawn. We walked through the courthouse doors into a night crackling with camera flashes. Microphones thrust forward, reporters shouting my name, asking if I felt vindicated, if I would forgive, if I was afraid of retribution. I stopped only once, lifting my chin, the lights glaring against the wrinkles carved by years of sacrifice. I am not afraid, I said. I am 70 years old. I have nothing left to lose except my dignity, and that. I will never surrender. The crowd roared, questions flying like arrows, but I turned away, guided Jasmine through the storm. A taxi door slammed shut behind us, muffling the chaos. For the first time in months, I exhaled without shaking. Tomorrow, the jury would decide my family's fate. But tonight, I already knew, I had reclaimed my own. The next morning, the courthouse was packed to the rafters as the jury filed in. Faces solemn, the foreman holding a slip of paper that could shatter, or save, the Hayes legacy forever. The morning air outside the courthouse carried the weight of a storm, not of rain, but of justice about to fall. People crowded the steps, spilling onto the sidewalk. News vans lined the street. Their satellite dishes pointed skyward, beaming the story to every corner of the country. Inside, the benches were packed shoulder to shoulder, buzzing with tension. The jury filed in, 12 ordinary citizens suddenly heavy with extraordinary power. Their faces were pale but steady, eyes fixed ahead, lips pressed tight as if they feared even breath might tip the balance. The judge entered, robes trailing like a shadow. His gavel struck once. This court will come to order. Jury, have you reached a verdict? The foreman, a stout man with tired eyes, rose. In his hand was a folded slip of paper, the sum of weeks of testimony. Lies, and truth. My heart thundered in my chest. Beside me, Jasmine's hand gripped mine so tightly her knuckles blanched. Yes, Your Honor, the foreman said. His voice was rough, but clear. We have. The bailiff carried the paper to the bench. The judge unfolded it, scanned, then handed it back to the foreman. Read the verdict. The room fell into a silence so sharp it hurt. In the case of the state versus Richard Hayes and Vanessa Hayes, we, the jury, find the defendant Richard Hayes. He swallowed hard, then spoke the word that broke the air like glass. Guilty. Guilty of conspiracy, fraud, elder abuse, and attempted forgery. Gasps and murmurs exploded, but the judge's gavel silenced them. The foreman continued, we find the defendant Vanessa Hayes guilty of fraud, conspiracy, and elder abuse. A collective shudder rippled through the courtroom. Some in the gallery applauded before the judge barked them quiet. Richard, brought back from holding for the verdict, sat stone still, his face drained of all color. He didn't blink, didn't move, like a statue carved from rage. Vanessa collapsed into her chair, sobbing uncontrollably, mascara streaking down her cheeks. The judge's voice cut through the storm. This jury has spoken. Sentencing will follow. Bailiffs, take the defendants into custody. The clank of handcuffs rang out. Cruel and final. Richard jerked once against the bailiff's grip. But his strength was gone. Vanessa let herself be led away. Still weeping, I sat unmoving, the world spinning around me, reporters scribbling, cameras clicking, whispers filling every corner. Then Jasmine leaned into me, her voice trembling. It's over. Grandma, you won. I shook my head gently. No, my girl, we won. The judge addressed the courtroom one last time. This case will be remembered, not only for the crimes, but for the courage it took to expose them. Court adjourned. The gavel came down like the closing of a book. And just like that, the long war was over. Justice isn't always swift. Sometimes it crawls. Sometimes it limps. But when it finally arrives, it does so with a weight no lie can withstand. I learned that family is not bound by blood but by loyalty. That love without respect is just a weapon waiting to be turned against you. And that it is better to stand alone in truth than surrounded by kin in betrayal. At 71, I discovered that survival is not enough, you must claim your dignity. Even if it means standing in court against your own flesh and blood. And perhaps the greatest lesson, it is never too late to start again.